G'day Trailblazers, my name is Cam, and for today's video, we're taking you through the Server Side Javascript function for HTTP post, allowing you to send a post request to a third-party endpoint with some headers and a payload, and then return those values into your server-side JavaScript code. So to start with, the HTTP post function in server-side JavaScript works mostly the same way as the AMP script variant as well, allowing you to post your data and headers to an endpoint and then return those values. You can see here from the syntax that we use the HTTP post call function to a destination URL, providing the content type that we're sending, the content body will send, plus some header names and values as well. Now, one thing to be aware of is that this function does exist inside of the core library. So if we click on the HTTP function header, we will have to use the platform load call when we try this out for ourselves. So with nothing left to do, let's now jump into Marketing Cloud and make a HTTP post function, and we'll try and return a token from the Marketing Cloud server using some API credentials. So jump into Marketing Cloud now, and I'll jump into my test bed for making these API calls. I've got my server-side JavaScript code block ready to go. What I don't have is my platform library call loaded in. So let's bring that code in so I can load in that core library. Now I can jump back into my HTTP post functions. I can get my code example. I'm going to jump down and get this example code set here, which does include our core set. So there we go. I can copy that and replace our entire code with the example. Perfect. We have here straight away that same syntax, and once again, all the values spitting out for us. Now, for the example today, we're going to call the Marketing Cloud post endpoint to get a token. Now, we've got the documentation for that on the APIs documentation inside Marketing Cloud. I'll put the link to this in the video description below. As we can see, the get access token goes to our subdomain to the auth endpoint, and then we get the v2 token, and it's a post method. The documentation here does show this in curl format, which is a bit hard to read. If you want a more indicative one for our SSJS call today, you can use the HTTP version, which shows us exactly what we need to know, the endpoint plus the body we're going to use, and the content type, name and value for our headers. Or you can also use the fetch function, which again calls it out. Here's the headers, and here's our body. So let's start by getting the values that we need, which is those headers and the body. Now, the body code here is already nicely formatted, so let's grab this body content and drop it into our code. We can see here it's called payload in this example, and it's called body in the other one. I'm going to use the word payload, that way it's the same as my existing code here. Now we're not going to use this multi-line function. Instead, we're going to do it on a single line with a single quote. To do this, we're of course going to have to bring all this code up onto a single line. Now, a few things we can do when it comes to this payload. We don't need the account ID, as we're not doing a multi-account query, but we do want to have our client secret and client key, client ID with our grant type of client credentials. What we do need though is our actual credentials to put in. So we have to replace the client ID and client secret with our actual credentials before we can run this function. Now for the content type, of course, we're going to want to use a JSON payload. So if we jump into our existing documentation here, we're not going to use the content type of XML. We use content type application JSON. So I can replace content type as application JSON just like that. Of course, that goes in the content type ordinal. We've got our payload as our body, which of course is a variable, not a constant. Next, we need our header name and header values. Now, to do this API call successfully, we need to provide a couple of fields. Have a look at my documentation. It's going to be what? Well, for our headers, what do we need? Just that content type, actually, which we've already provided. So we don't need any more headers than just that one. So there's actually no more headers to provide. How handy. So we can leave those ones as blank. Draw all that out. There we are. Of course, we already have payload looking good. One last thing to add in, that's of course going to be our URL. Now the URL, we need two parts. One is the actual URL for the API call, and the other is the API's endpoint. I'm going to jump into my setup screen in Marketing Cloud, and I've already provisioned a brand new API key for my HTTP post function today. Now I can see here's my authentication base, so I'm going to copy that URL using the copy button just like that, and I can drop that in to my URL just like this. Now we're not done yet, that's just the base of the call. We can now go to our auth token API and get the rest of the call. You can see here auth marketingcloudapis.com. Well, that's very similar to our auth marketingcloudapis.com. So what comes at the end? Well, back in our documentation, it's the v2 token. So we can copy that and add that to the end as our destination to hit. Now we have everything that we need, except for, of course, our client ID and client secret. I can jump into my API key that I've made and copy my client ID, drop it in client ID, and copy my client secret, dropping in my client secret. And there we have it. That's all our values put in. Now, of course, we're going to get back the response code from all this and our response information, which should be a string. So let's try call the API call now and make sure it works. So I'll save our code and go to my cloud page and press refresh and see if we get a good result. And we do. Good. The results come back with an array list. Okay, so the response, the second value that we're printing out, is actually an object. It's not a string. So the response here is going to be an object. Let's have a look at the documentation and see what it said. Now, your parameters, body, media type, great response. Aha, it responds back exactly what we asked for, which is a JSON payload, which will look a little bit like this. Okay, good to know. Well, since we can't print out a JSON payload, of course, unless we stringify it, we should do that first. So let's try that to make sure it's coming through correctly by stringifying our response. So we can go stringify and stringify our response code. Now with this done, we should be able to print out the entire JSON payload as a string. Let's go refresh, and sure enough, there it is. There is our full payload. There's one more thing we should do though. As we can see, there's actually some information here that we need to get access to. This access token and so on and so forth. Well, if we go back down into our code, let's actually stringify the entire result and see the entire thing that was sent. Because I'm pretty sure there's another parameter that we haven't actually picked up yet. Stringify the result and see what gets printed out. Aha, the response, and there it is, an object with this single entity inside. So it's response, and the JSON response is the first response row. Aha, there we go. Let's try and do that instead. So we instead do our JSON and we get our response, and we stringify the response 0, the first row that comes back. Let's see what that does. We should just get that one object. And indeed we do, here it is here, but of course it's already a string, we don't have to re-stringify it. So with that known, we can drop out our stringify, and there is our response 0. Now let's check it out. Beautiful. There is our JSON payload as a string. Now since it is a string, of course, we can't address it. We can't address a string, we can only address a JSON object. So instead we'll have to now recompress this string back into a JSON object. And to do that, we can use our parse JSON code. So back into our documentation on SSJS, into our utility functions, we can use our platform function parse JSON. Grab that function and go back into our code. We have our result printing out, that's great. Now let's do var JSON is equal to the parsed JSON of the response. And it's not just the response though, it's the response 0, as we've just discovered. Okay, so now we should have that addressed correctly as a JSON object. With our JSON object addressed correctly, we can now address the individual items in that object. What we want to address, of course, is the access token, and what else? The REST instance URL, that'd be a good one. Let's get those two values. So first, the access token. Get in here to our right and say access token is equal to, and then print out what? Well, it's the JSON object .access token. Let's see if that works. We'll go save, and then just print out the access token and the response code above. Refresh, and there it is, access token, and print it out in full. So as you can see, the HTTP post function in Server Side JavaScript is just as easy to use as its AMP script variant. It allows you to call those third-party or even Marketing Cloud endpoints to return a JSON payload as desired. Now again, the best part about the Server Side JavaScript version is that it does return those JSON payloads, which are beautifully easy to handle using the parse JSON function in Server Side JavaScript. The HTTP post function is definitely one of the ones I use the most when programming in Server Side JavaScript, so I definitely recommend learning it and adding it to your arsenal of codes that you can use when you're developing inside Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So I hope that today's video has helped you to learn and understand better how to use the HTTP post function inside of SSJS. If it has, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And don't forget, if you have enjoyed it, to give the video a big thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you can be notified when I release more Salesforce Marketing Cloud content.